Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dynasty Gambit on the Going for Two Live Network. You're not two, but three co-hosts are here as always. My name is Kyle Senra, and joining me are Brian and Devin. How are you both doing? Devin, we'll start with you.
I'm doing great. Had a good time at the Super Bowl. I don't know about you guys if you had a good time with that, but it was a pretty good game. So now ready to get into the real deep dive of the off season. So looking forward to getting this started.
As for me, it's Monday's definitely the beginning of Dynasty for the season. So it's an amazing clear cutoff right there between 2021 and jumping into 2022. And the game was good. Second half was a little slow. Defense was definitely dominated, but still enjoyed the game. And I didn't really have a dog in the fight, but I'm always for underdogs. So to say I was a little disappointed is not a huge understatement. Of course, I'm a Steelers fan, as you can tell by my jersey. So, I'm not always been a Bengals fan. So, but I was for them this week.
Yeah, I typically go for underdog stories, or as I was saying, in this case, under cat stories. That would have been quite spectacular for the players, but I think especially for the Bengals fans who've been waiting for a championship for a while. So unfortunately, coming up just short, but they also showed a video of the Bengals returning home, and that fan base seems like incredibly excited for what the future holds in Cincinnati. And I do think we're going to be talking about that in this episode here.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely one of those. The Rams put everything in to win this year. I mean, there's so many pending free agents, so that'll be interesting to see. Heck, even the coach considers himself a free agent, so we'll see.
I guess just to speak on that, Brian, you're right. They did go all in, and I do wonder, what you guys have found. And I guess I'm kind of just bringing this up on the spot now, but how many managers really are going all in? And I was recently listening to the most recent Dynasty and Chill episode. And Jordan McNamara's on there, the Analytics of Dynasty guide. He was talking about how, win rates and playing, building your analysis based on win rates is generally a good strategy, because it seems like maybe only half the league's really going all in to win. And a lot of teams are building picks, especially as the season gets on and teams get eliminated. But to do it right from the get-go, even, it seems like, some teams, some managers, and I've seen in some startups that they go right into the startup year one, and I'm playing already for the future. They're acquiring multiple future picks already, and they're, if they compete, so better, but they're really trying to set themselves up to, for the future years. So I don't know, have you guys noticed that in your dynasty leagues at all?
Some teams of mine definitely look like first year starter teams that they're building towards the future. I can speak for myself. I actually try to build mine with a solid core of 5 guys. Last year, my guys in one league, kind of my preferred league, was Dak, Eckler, Mixon, Tyreek Hill, and Calvin Ridley, who, of course, didn't pan out for this year. But I always like to try to build a solid core to at least be competitive. And then my trades throughout the year, I noticed that I'm oftentimes trading the slightly older, maybe like a Brandon Cooks, for a younger guy, maybe a Darnell Mooney or something like that. And I build younger so I can continue to be competitive year in and year out. So,
yeah, I've noticed quite a few teams across multiple of my dynasty leagues at the moment that are, even if they're in the middle ground where they might have a chance, depending on how the chips fall next year, are trading away a lot of key pieces to try to get some of these 2023 guys. So, or at least some of the picks and everything like that. So I've been seeing a lot of people move in 2022 picks to move into 2023, and even some guys like DeAndre Hopkins, even some middle guys, maybe like a Calvin Ridley, stuff like that. So it's pretty unique this year. Usually I don't see this much movement going toward the following year and not the active year now that we're in that off season. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of teams that are in that mode for sure.
Yeah, I feel like the threshold of where teams will give up this year picks to get 2023 is a lot earlier. I think generally even getting, I feel like you can mostly kind of do that most years with the 111, 112, easily move it for a future first, just on the banking of what are the odds that my team does, or the pick I'm holding does that well again, to where I'm picking again or the team I'm trading with is that team at the 111. Like, you kind of play those odds, but it seems like this year teams are kind of more willing. Listening to some podcasts even, and just dynasty talk in different group chats, like as soon as you get to the 107, even in super flex leagues, 108, teams are already trying to look to move those for future picks. So maybe this maybe that in a sense that's almost makes some of these 22 picks cheaper than even as we get into draft season, and then the picks will elevate. Maybe they don't elevate as high as they do in other years. Probably the top end still will, but really as soon as you get to the mid first, those picks kind of maybe don't raise in value as much. So is that still an opportunity to buy into the mid first maybe?
Yeah, I think this year in 2022, besides pretty good depth at the wide receiver position, the other positions are kind of shallow, to be perfectly honest, especially running backs compared to prior years.
Anyway, so great discussion right off the bat. Again, off the fly, just kind of thought of the idea. So good conversations, guys. And of course, listeners, viewers, if you want to converse with us, while the video will play on Twitter, I know we got tweeted out through different accounts. Comments, however, won't appear for us. So if you are looking to reach out for us, interact, we advise you check out the YouTube page, the Going for Two Facebook page as well, and on Twitch. We can get comments from all those places and see them here, and definitely interact with you, because we do love that interaction, and I love interacting with my two co-hosts. But yeah, definitely want to get the listener viewer interaction going as well. So any questions at all, feel free. But yeah, I guess we don't really need to do a Super Bowl recap. Like I said, the Rams, we didn't really say the score. Rams won 23-20. What a close game. And yeah, so I think it's funny because Brian, one of your top tier running backs did play in the Super Bowl, in Joe Mixon. And I guess my hesitation with him is I guess kind of showed itself in the Super Bowl, right? The lack of pass catching, like he kind of always coming off the field on third downs. And I listened to the Full Press Packers pod. I gave a pretty good rant on Zach Taylor. I thought he did some really good things in that game, some really interesting play designs. The Joe Mixon passing touchdown, for instance, what a great way to kind of play off what the defense was doing. A team that does like to play downhill and get after the ball carriers. So if they're going to commit to, okay, Mixon makes an outside run, they're going to all come downhill to try and tackle him. Way to kind of use that against them. But I felt, some other things got really predictable, and the lack of Mixon on third down, I think, bothers me. So do you want to speak on that at all, Brian, at all? And any concern there?
Yeah, now keep in mind in terms of my tier one, he was definitely would be fourth on my tier one, right behind Eckler. But I think barring injury next year, he's going to be a top 5 back. So I'm okay with him being the lowest end of tier one or the highest end of tier 2. That's just my thoughts. You got a good offense. I personally, even especially in redraft for this coming year, I'd rather go with Mixon than DeAndre Swift. That's just me.
Yeah, I guess probably guaranteed to get more carries and like you're saying, better offense, more touchdowns as well, because Mixon definitely did do like that. Kind of what we were always kind of hoping for, like the big touchdown season, and again the massive volume on the ground. Would like to see that skill set be a bit more used for pass catching wise, which again makes sense for why you have him behind a guy like Eckler, who's kind of like really solid in that pass catching role.
And his rushing stats will be better moving forward. Rams always get plenty of credit for having a good rush defense, but they really do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that O-line probably will improve. Run blocking wise, that O-line does seem to be, I think they were 15th this year in adjusted line yards, according to Football Outsiders. So like while they're bottom of the league and allowing sacks, the run blocking actually is where that line is stronger. So that's something that like Mixon kind of has an advantage. As much as you'd love to throw a ton with Burrow, that O-line is kind of seems like it's more designed to be a run blocking O-line.
I think the center of the line is probably a little bit better than the tackles for sure. So I could see them especially concentrating since they were smart enough to pick up Chase. I could see them picking up pretty much primarily offensive linemen this year.
I will say that the left tackle, Jonah Williams, this was basically his rookie year, right? He missed his entire rookie season 2020 with an injury, if I'm not mistaken. Or was that in 2019?
I think it was 2019, actually.
Okay, yeah. So like even though he's at like this will be this is the last year of his rookie contract, he's really only had 2 seasons, so still developing. I think he's a piece to build around. But yeah, I think right tackle needs to be addressed. You're right there. Devin, did you want to say anything about Mixon before we get into the wide receiver talk?
No, I have Mixon in a lot of leagues actually. Really like the player. I'm kind of confused on why they don't pass to him more. I think he's been a pretty proven, capable pass catching running back. Compared to guys like Evans and Samar JP Ryan, it's not like you have none of those guys I would consider elite pass catchers. So I'm kind of confused on why they've been taking him out. The only thing I'm a little worried about on the Mixon front is I think at the beginning of the year, they really leaned on him pretty heavily as they were trying to ease Burrow back in. And towards the end of the year, they became very pass heavy. So I think that's just kind of one thing. I'm not afraid to draft him, obviously. I think he's still a great guy. He's only 25 years old. But it is something to keep an eye out, as I think they are still going to keep with that pass first design. So that's going to be one thing going forward.
Well, I guess apparently Devin's the popular one, longtime listener here. First time question: if you have the 102 pick, would you take Breece Hall or Isaiah Spiller? So I guess we are getting into some rookie running back talk. I wonder why this question is particularly asked at you. I feel like there's an inside joke there. Which you can or cannot reveal if you don't want to.
This gentleman is in one of my dynasty leagues, and he has the 102 pick, and has been trying to get this information out of me. So now he's putting me on camera to get it out there. But I mean, for me, before we start getting into our wide receivers, I guess I would probably go Breece Hall. Really, those two I think are pretty even. I don't know a whole lot about either of them at the moment. I haven't done a deep dive, but landing spot's going to be a huge factor just because of how close they're ranked at the moment. But if the draft was today, I'd probably do Breece Hall just because I know more about his college career. What about you guys? You have any opinions on it?
Yeah, feel free to chime in,
Breece Hall.
Brian.
He's my RB1, and I've done last of all. I did some writing, some Devi articles, and we had to do top 75 rankings with that site. So I don't know. My Breece Hall is my guy.
Man, you could have like even just a couple days more, and I'd have a much better answer. Because my running back evaluation, I try to watch at least 3 games of each. I think I have watched 3 games of each. I just need to kind of tabulate all the scores now of what I've got to like what have I actually seen, right? Like the things I'm looking for, the footwork, contact balance, the pad level, body fluidity. But the one thing I think, based on what I've seen, just like what I remember watching, Breece Hall's burst like comes off the screen like constantly. I'm giving him that check mark on a ton of plays, which I'm pretty stingy with my burst score. Like you really got to show me something, like make a difference. Like this guy's going to make the tackle and you've got that second gear to evade him. And he seems to be getting it constantly. In a sense, it reminds me of DeAndre Swift. Like that was the one thing I remember DeAndre Swift from that class, was that like initial burst, which made him such a great pass catcher as well. So I would lean Hall. I was listening to a podcast today it was on yesterday, the Armchair Fantasy Show. Jeff and Ryan brought on a good guest, Jax Falcone, and he was talking about this Twitter thread by someone. I've heard it referenced on a few podcasts. Noah, I don't remember the guy's last name, but basically it was a comparative look at Spiller, and I guess he didn't lead his. There's another running back on the team that actually had better yards per scrimmage, and they kind of went through a list of all the running backs that's had happened in their final season where they weren't the team leader in yards per scrimmage. And the list is a lot of bust guys. Not to say that's going to happen to Spiller, but that was kind of a bit of an eye-opening evidence. So now I did my tape evaluation before I took that into account. So once I get those numbers, maybe next week, check back in and I'll have a better answer. But I think right now it's Breece Hall for that, just specifically that burst ability that really comes off the tape to me. And I probably, like, if I had to pick one to be my RB1, it's probably Hall for that reason. But yeah, like I said, I'll have a better answer once I go through my scores.
All right, you guys ready to get into some wide receiver talk?
Sure. So first, just a few things I do want to get to. I guess there's only 5 days left of this promotion. We talked about it on the previous episode. The PLP, the Personal League podcasts, which you can order all year. $100 US is the normal cost, but if you order before February 22nd, 2022, which is 02222022. Well, I love the twos are going for 2, of course. But if you order before February 22nd, you get 22% off. So $22 off of that. So good savings for those Personal League podcasts, which a few of us from Going for 2 will get together and just go through an entire league, all 12 teams, give tips and tricks for each manager, with kind of strategies for everyone, what we think they should do with their teams. And we have a lot of fun. We've already got a couple booked already, and looking forward to that. So get yours today. And you can also get tons of Going for 2 great gear on goingfor2.com/store or viridianglobal.com and look for the Going for 2 collection there. Great hats. I love the Scott Fishbowl shirts, this Radiohead shirt, which I love Radiohead as a band. I find there's such a wide range of musical styles. I mean, they can just, 2 guitars, a bass and drum, and they can hammer out these crazy rock songs. Or they go completely experimental and very, very electronic based. Johnny Greenwood, the lead guitarist, he plays a ton of instruments, keyboards, violins. So wide range of outcomes, which is like wide receivers in the NFL. So I guess talking our dynasty wide receiver tier talk. Last week we kind of talked about, at the top, not that Jonathan Taylor was alone in the top tier, but we all had him as the RB1 very, very easily, like consensus wise, like all three of us kind of agree that. I don't know if that's as easy at wide receiver. So I think the first question is, before we talk about the tiers, who is the wide receiver one in Dynasty? So Devin, we'll start with you.
For me, I'm going Jamar Chase. It's real close. We're going to talk about the other guy here in a sec, I'm sure. But the main factor is, they had very great rookie years, both of them. They both had solid. Yeah, I'll just go ahead. Justin Jefferson also was the other consideration for me. He also had a great year. But when you look at, Jamar's situation being tied to his college quarterback, the obvious chemistry that they have together, and being 2 years younger, I know they're both still very young, but when Jamar Chase is 21 and Justin Jefferson is 23, you still get a couple of years there of extra benefit. So for me, it's Jamar Chase.
Brian, any different answer there?
I'm just going to go contrarian. Honestly, I could go either way and flip a coin, but I'll go Jefferson only because I really have high respect. I totally agree with everything that was said in regards to the connection between Burrow and Chase. But my thought process, like I said, I could flip a coin. It wouldn't matter. But for me, I'm only going Jefferson because there's Higgins across from Chase. And there's many games where Higgins has been just as productive as Chase. And with Thielen he's 32 now, pretty much most of the targets are going to be shadowed to Jefferson. So just for sake of argument, I'll go with Jefferson myself.
Yeah, I think that. So is that all our top tiers? Is it just Jefferson and Chase? That's the top tier at wide receiver. Is that the case for you two?
That's amazing.
Not for me. I have 5 in my tier 1.
Okay, interesting. Because I do side with Brian on just the production that they've put up through, I guess now Jefferson through 2 years, but incredible rookie seasons both, and the youth, like it's really kind of unmatched, and I really do feel like it's kind of just elevate into a tier of their own. Not that I think they're necessarily the only wide receivers that deserve to go in the first round of a startup. So I guess maybe that's kind of the next discussion. So I think, probably, last week or I guess 2 weeks ago, we put a poll out attached to one of the episodes talking about who's the RB2 in Dynasty. I kind of phrased it tier wise, like who would you put in the top tier alongside JT? So just looking at those results, put in basically all the guys we talk about in our top tier. So Austin Eckler, Najee Harris, Joe Mixon, DeAndre Swift. I think there's a reason all three of us had Harris in our top tier, and I think a lot of listeners kind of agreed with too. 42% said Najee Harris, 36% said Swift. So I know I was the only one to have him in the top tier. So maybe the listeners, the youth, kind of going with Swift as well. 17% said Eckler, and only 6% answered Joe Mixon. So I think definitely the youth pushes it up there, and I guess really does do that the case here with these two wide receivers. For who I'd have as wide receiver one, I think it's Chase. I know you said, Devin, the connection with the college quarterback. I don't even know if it's that. I just think he's going to be tied to whether he just this is his first year with Burrow or not. I think he's just going to be tied. They're both on rookie contracts. There's much more stability there. Whereas it seems like contract wise, you look at what Kirk Cousins' final season, he's likely tied to Minnesota. Like they really don't save any money getting rid of him or cutting him. There's kind of the rest of this year is guaranteed. So maybe this offseason there's an extension that comes in to help them cap space wise for this season, because I think his cap it's like in the 40. I think it's like 45 million.
I'm pretty sure it's 45. Yeah.
It might end up being the highest cap hit for any quarterback. So if that's the case, I don't like. You almost think it's going to go one of two ways. They're either going to trade him or they're going to extend him, right? Like I don't see him going into the season with this. So maybe there's more clarity there by the time you're drafting a startup. Maybe there's a bit more faith in taking Jefferson for that reason. But yeah, I think we're all kind of saying like it is really a coin flip. You could go either way. There's strong arguments to be made for both, and I think that's why I'm kind of leaning with Brian on saying that it's a tier of just two. So I guess, Brian, that's our tier number one. So I'm curious, Devin, who are the three other names you have in your tier one?
So the other ones that I have in mind, tier one, are just AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill, and CeeDee Lamb. I do get what you guys are saying, how there is definitely a little bit of the more elite performance when you're talking about Chase and Jefferson. I've just been a big AJ Brown guy ever since he's come into the league. And I think when he's fully healthy, he's fully capable of doing what those guys are doing. And he has put up similar numbers when he is out there. And then, Tyreek is still attached to Mahomes. He's still pretty young. He hasn't lost a step with his speed or anything. And CD, you could make a case, could be down in the tier 2. He's still just 22 years old as well, and he's tied to Dak for quite a while. I'm sure he'll probably get an extension there as well. So that's the reasons I have them all up there. I think, overall, they're basically all young, number one options on their team with a lot of good quarterback play behind them.
Yeah, okay. So I think for myself, I guess it's almost an easy transition into my tier 2 because a couple of the names are similar to yours, Devin. I've got AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill, but I'll put a third name instead of CD Lamb, and it's Cooper Kupp. And this one I was toying with. Do I put him in tier 2 or tier 3? But frankly, after the season he had last year, the Triple Crown winner, one of the greatest wide receiver seasons we've ever seen, it's tough. Like, even though he's 29, it's like I was really toying with it. Okay, is he old? Is the age too much that I can overlook it? But his game seems like it's just like solid route running. Knows where to be, knows how to beat zone coverage really well. Like, just like super high football IQ. So that's not really gonna go away. Like, it's not like he's burning DBs every time down the field. And although I also do think that the losing a step does kind of maybe get overstated a little bit. I think to me, it's not the speed guys I worry about aging out. It's the contested catch physical receivers. Because when you can't out muscle guys and they can't get open, what happens now? I think that there's been some pretty fast people that have kind of maintained their speed into their 30s. So I'm less worried about the speed guys. So again, Tyreek Hill, even though he's 27, I think definitely belongs in this tier 2. Even could make that argument of being tier 1, Devin. I have him as my dynasty wide receiver 3 right now, so really teetering on that edge. I guess my only pushback really is on CD Lamb. Just because his market share and the amount of targets he's getting percentage wise. I know it's a nice health. Like, you look at the totals because the Cowboys pass so much, but relative to his team, he's not striking as alpha. Like, his market share has been just hovering around 20% instead of the closer to the 30%, like guys like Cooper Kupp, for instance. So I think he still needs to take a step up, whereas Chase and Jefferson have already shown it. So that's kind of
for sure.
He could this year. Maybe this is the year that breaks out because he's produced well. Like, so it's tough to say break out because he's already been a top 24 receiver twice already in 2 seasons. So how much more can he go? Like, what is the potential for him to elevate that, or is he just going to kind of stay around a top 15 receiver the whole time? So I guess that's my hesitation on Lamb as a tier 1. But Brian, any comments? Do you want to get to your tier 2?
My tier 2 is very similar to y'all's. I will say this: I've got Lamb and also AJ Brown in tier 3. So my tier 2 is kind of limited. I went with Kupp and Hill as well. But also, even though we don't know who his quarterback's going to be next year, I have a hard time pushing Devontae Adams out of tier 2 for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Could definitely see that too. And again, if we get clarity that Rodgers is there, it probably is tough to argue against him being in tier 2. Same thing as Cooper Kupp, right? They're at that age, 29, 30, but they're so productive that you can overlook that. And again, it's technique. It's not pure athleticism. It's things that can maintain as their 8-game ages.
And one thing, Devin, I think I'm pretty sure he's admitted before, age is one of his predominant factors, rightfully so in Dynasty. I'm a little bit more, even though they're a little older. I'm always, what have you done for me lately, and what could you do? And both Brown and also Lamb, the potential is just immense. But neither one of them has met their ceiling yet, which is good. But that also gives me a little bit of fear. Will they meet that ceiling? So I've just got them bumped down 1 tier.
And I mean, to be fair, you talked about it last week too. Like, even with running backs, you're doing that as well. Like, having Mixon and Eckler near the top. So if and it seems like a position that's more volatile as you get up in age. So if you're gonna not ding running backs for age, it makes perfect sense to also not ding wide receivers for their age either.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right, so Devin, you're tier 2 now.
So in my tier 2, I have DK Metcalf, Debo Samuel, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, and Stefan Diggs and Jalen Waddle. So I have another 5-piece tier here. It's DK was a lot higher for me. Not even during the in season. Actually, on one of our last shows, I had him actually in my top 5. So, I mean, he didn't have a strong year this year, but he's still been proven. He's still tied to Wilson for the time being. And he's still an all-around great wide receiver, so he's in there. Debo's the one who's made the biggest jump on my rankings. He's always been good. I've always been high on Debo, but this year, I mean, he just went to a whole nother level. And I mean, he's 25 years old. So I feel like he's justified being in the tier 2. The quarterback situation's a little hairy there. So it's going to depend. But then, the other guys, I mean, you got Devontae Adams, who we've already talked about, Cooper Kupp. The only 2 we haven't discussed so far that would have been on there, besides DK and Debo, is Stefan and Jalen. So Jalen I struggled with. I almost left him in my tier 3. But he had a monster year, and I really do like the signing of their head coach with Mike McDaniels. I think they're going to do a lot of things to try to scheme him open and use him a little bit differently. So I think his ceiling is actually going to be even better than what it was last year. I know I kind of – oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I know I named a bunch of guys right there, so I'll hand it back over to you and we can discuss as you guys see fit.
Well, I guess Waddle's a good place to start because McDaniel coming in, and I guess he's worked with wide receivers. I guess he was like, I guess you now, if he's successful, you're going to have just another guy that was in Washington that they chose not to. They chose Jay Gruden ahead of, instead of, they had all these guys internally, and now we'll get Jay Gruden in. No offense to Jay Gruden, who's he's a legit head coach. I mean, I'm pretty sure they went to the playoffs once with him. So
yeah, it's actually theoretically, it's actually his coaching tree that's doing all this. I know that Sean McVay gets all the credit for it, but really it's Jay Gruden's coaching tree.
I mean, it's all just a Mike Shanahan coaching tree anyway, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
it's all one big tree. But yeah, I think also, like, I think, did they bring in Wes Welker as the wide receivers coach?
They did. They brought him. He brought him from San Fran with him.
So emphasis maybe on the slot receiver, just through experience, and that probably, I mean, Waddle looked like he was fitting into that role fine. So just further emphasis on that position as being maybe, and we've kind of seen that in this, again, it's all the same tree, but the McVay, Matt LaFleur tree side of the tree, very heavy emphasis on the slot receiver. We talked about with Cooper Kupp, how much they're moving Devontae Adams into the slot over the last 3 years, not having him just on the perimeter. Like LaFleur seems to really like having that as a chess piece. So maybe that's what's taken, like, in this McDaniel offense. They go with that slot receiver is going to get 150 targets, and if Waddle's there primarily, that should boast well for him.
Yeah, and I mean, Gesicki's a free agent, so he might not even be back. So that's going to create some more room for him in the middle. And then, the thing for Waddle coming out of college was he was a really big deep threat. And we really didn't see too much of that last year. So I think you might get the best of both worlds, where they're going to give him those quick screen passes, hit him in the slot, and then also go over the top with him. But even if they take a handful of aspects from Debo's game, I know he can't run the ball. He's not built like Debo, so I don't think he can take the punishment of a running back. But even just lining him up in the backfield, with 2 backs or whatever, throwing to him out of the backfield, just making sure you get the ball in his hands, because, I mean, he's fast, and as soon as he gets the balls in his hands, he's going to make a play. So I think there's going to be a little more gadgetry to him. Like I said, I don't think he's going to be used as a running back, but I can see him lining up, catching passes out of the backfield as well.
One thing you have to really like about Waddle, he had very few down games. He had so many targets pretty much every game and receptions. He gives you a very solid floor. And towards the end of the season, he started scoring a few touchdowns anyway. I think the first half of the season, he didn't have a single touchdown. And finally, he's turned that on a lot in the second half. So he's got huge upside. And some of the other players that I'll discuss momentarily, they had a lot more down games than he did.
So, yeah. I think that, I guess the one thing I just wanted to mention with those names quick with Debo is, you said it right. Like, not a lot of wide receivers can take that punishment, but does that also include Debo, right? Like, can he sustain what he did this year, or, maybe cut back on his rushing attempts? Does that, I doubt he finishes as the wide receiver 2 next year, but he's also not being priced as the wide receiver 2. So you don't necessarily need that to happen to justify taking him. He's probably going to be considered, though, a top 12 receiver now.
Oh, I think so for sure. And I mean, it is a question. He's already been banged up a lot in his career, even before he really started getting this rushing upside to him. But they also were kind of desperate at the time when they had to start using him as a running back. As they had 5 running backs go down at that time. So I mean, I think they still will use it, but I kind of agree with you. I don't think they're gonna be featuring him as much, if you will. Maybe 5 carries a game, not 15, 13, somewhere in there.
Especially for our fantasy purposes, because it seems like as the playoffs went on, they just did it more and more, right? Like they're not having to save him, so they'll use it less the regular season to save him up for the playoffs, or if they're fighting for playoff spots, that's when they'll start to see it more. So you might get lucky in a championship week where the heavy usage goes that way again. But yeah, it's not going to necessarily bank on him getting that many carries, but still, like I think the yards after the catch ability, they design him plays. In the passing game as well as in the run game to get him the ball in space, and he can do that from the outside as well as the inside. So it's not it seems like it's unsustainable, but the way they design that offense around him, it might not be. Right, Shanahan might be the one the best to figure it out for him.
And it's it's going to be interesting because I mean Trey Lance is going to be taking over. I mean they're already currently working on a trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, and even though Jimmy Garoppolo is not the best quarterback in the world, he's pretty solid. So, I mean, he does still, get the ball to him. He knows how to, get the ball to his playmakers with him and Kittle. So it's going to be interesting to see what Trey Lance can do when he takes over. I know he's got a little bit of running to his game too. So does that eat into the opportunities that Debo gets running the ball as well? Especially when you factor in Mitchell. So there's a lot of question marks around Debo, but when you put up a season like that, it's kind of hard to keep him lower on your rankings list.
Well, everyone had Ayuk over Debo blaster in dynasty rankings and redraft rankings. I mean, if someone didn't, then I'm sorry, but it just seemed like that was almost across the board. Everyone was going Ayuk over Debo. And I was too, and I was kind of really pushing that of Ayuk in his rookie season outscored either of Debo's first 2 seasons, so it's like he's already kind of shown to be better. But yeah, definitely going to be the opposite this year, where Debo's definitely the higher price guy, but the way he scored this year is much higher than what Ayuk's done through his first.
One thing I'm looking forward to seeing, Garoppolo has not been able to maintain both wide receivers plus Kittle. I'll be interested. I would imagine first year starting, Lance may not be able to, but moving forward, I'd like to see if he could support 2 wide receivers and Kittle, because that wasn't done under Garoppolo.
Yeah, I think you almost got it like a guy like Kittle. That'll get into this more than the tight end episode. I guess it relates to AJ Brown, because my feeling of, again, why it's funny where we all kind of had AJ Brown differently, right? Devin, you had him in tier 1.
I did. He was the last one of my tier 1.
Now, I'm in tier 2 currently, wide receiver 4, and I think similar to Tyreek Hill, if they don't get the massive volume, they can still have a massive fantasy game based on yards efficiency. With Debo being so great after the catch, AJ Brown might be one of the best yards after the catch receivers in the game. So that's why I'm a little higher on him. I know, Brian, you mentioned you have AJ Brown in your tier 3. So why don't we get to your entire tier 3 here?
Well, that's it's a little bit deeper because my top 2 tiers were a little bit slimmer. So I've got a handful of guys in tier 3. I'm looking at AJ Brown would be near the very top, probably the top. Down from there, I've got CD. I've also got DK Metcalf. Next, I'm a big fan of T. Higgins. Huge fan of T. Higgins. We've already talked about Waddle. I've got him. And last but not least, for me, and like I said, it's a little bit deeper, is I've got Deontay Johnson. Of course, there's concern for me who's going to be the quarterback in Pittsburgh. But since we're talking about dynasty, and I'm a Steelers fan, there are other teams that seem to figure out the quarterback situation. But in general, Pittsburgh's won 17, had at least a 500 record 17 straight years. So something tells me maybe not this year, but in due time they'll figure out their situation.
I mean, it's not like he's gotten great quality quarterback play really at any point in his career. So he's just a target hog, right? He's earning his targets by being the best receiver on his team. And regardless of who the quarterback is, that's probably going to stay the same. I'd imagine no matter who he has a quarterback, and maybe, if it, the worst case scenario, if it has to be Rudolph or Haskins, the quality of targets isn't going to be as good as what he had with Ben, but should still see the volume.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like Big Ben could hit many more than 5-yard passes anyway. So Deontay he's pretty good yards after catch. So I've got pretty good confidence in him. And like we were talking about, there's a few things that, I mean, I could see Brown, Lamb, and also Metcalf taking the next step. They're good players. But one thing that bothered me is like A.J. Brown, he played in 13 games, and actually, I believe it was 8 games he had less than 50 yards receiving out of those 13. I just want to see more production and more consistency. I mean, he's had huge games where 140 yards plus. But once again, I just want to see some of those non-50-yard games become 75 to 100 yards. And same thing in regards to both Lamb and Metcalf. The only difference is Metcalf had 12 touchdowns, but Lamb had a lot of like 7 out of 9 games for him. He had 60 yards receiving or less. And then very similar scenario with Metcalf. And all 3 teams, even though we consider Dallas more of a passing team than the other two, in reality, Dak did not have nearly as good last year. I had him as my starting quarterback in a couple of leagues, and then he had many games where he just didn't produce what he should have. He has so many good receivers, but he just didn't play that well.
Yeah, they were on pace to set a bunch of like yardage records in 2020, and the defense played better in 2021, so they weren't in need of having to just have the sheer volume of passes.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Devin. You're okay.
Oh, I was just going to say, that is the one concern with all those guys you named there is I would say that all those teams are running back first teams, so a lot of times, Derrick Henry's getting fed all game. You got Zeke who's still getting quite a handful of carries. Carson was getting fed pretty well before he got hurt, and then Penny came in and he picked up even better from where Carson left off there towards the end of the year. So, I mean, that is the one risky part when you have a wide receiver on a running back first team. But so you're going to have those 50-yard clunkers and stuff. It's just going to be game script, But I completely see where you're coming from on your rankings there.
Now Brown's the one with the most upside, primarily because Henry's the older back of those 3 teams, and like we talked about in the last episode, who's going to step up when Henry decides it's time for me to retire? So I think you're going to get more passing game, and maybe they'll go out and get I don't think Tannehill's a bad quarterback, but he certainly didn't meet expectations last year either. So maybe he'll improve or they'll go elsewhere.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like he did go backwards a little bit when you add Julio Jones to the mix. Everyone kind of thought, with the year that Tannehill had and the year A.J. Brown was coming off of that, he was going to be able to take a little more coverage off of A.J. Brown, give him another dynamic that they were missing, and just didn't end up being the case.
And one thing I think is important for our listeners to think about is the names here, whether, maybe a little bit different tier, but the names are very similar. And one thing I did last year, I did my own projections, and it kind of gives you an opportunity. Doing projections wasn't that hard. It's the first time I'd ever done it. So maybe make your own projections. The names will be similar, but maybe you like player A better than we do, or maybe you don't, and then you can go the other direction. So always put a little input from yourself in there too. It's never bad.
Just quick question on your projections, Brian. Like method wise, I've heard a lot of when you do projections, you always start with the quarterback. You try and say, okay, how many total rush attempts versus pass attempts, figured out the quarterback, and then everything falls in place from there. Did you go with that method?
Yeah. And one thing that's important to remember. So I did, there are a lot of like software and databases that you can just plug in a couple of numbers and generate. I did everything by hand. And the one thing that I really made important was any team that was returning the same coach, offensive coordinator, and quarterback, I pretty much based my projections from the year before, keeping in mind that there was a 17-game season versus a 16. But like you said, it starts with the quarterback, and then you base it out from there. And the one thing that's easy to forget is don't forget to include your running backs in your projections, because a lot of people will just think, well, we got a tight end, we got wide receivers. But then you'll get 3/4 of the way through. It's like, I forgot my running backs over here that actually could provide pretty good receptions and targets too.
Yeah, not every team is like, not everyone's a Derrick Henry where they don't get the ball thrown towards them. So,
yeah. Exactly. Some teams won't have hardly any receptions or targets, but it's important to keep in mind who does.
So, Brian, I think the way we have our first 3-tiered structured is very similar, very shallow, like very, not deep tiers, the top two, but the third one, it gets massive. I've got 5 players combined in my first 2 tiers. I might double that in my third tier alone. And so maybe kind of talking this is, I think, a really deep spot for wide receivers. So I'll just kind of read off the names I've got. So I've already talked about DK Metcalf, Stefan Diggs, T. Higgins as well in tier 3. The young guys, CeeDee Lamb, Deebo Samuel, and then a couple of older guys. I guess Deontay Johnson's not that much older. But Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Deontay Johnson were kind of my next guys. And then I guess I'd even throw in Jalen Waddle as we've done. And maybe one name I'll add is DJ Moore. He's one I'm struggling with. Is he a tier 3 or tier 4? Is the quarterback situation that poor that he doesn't belong there? But we've talked about already, like, the aging guys, even with Kupp and Adams, they're still productive. I feel like Mike Evans kind of deserves that credit too. And especially, like, who knows what that receiving room is going to look like in Tampa Bay next year. I mean, who knows about the quarterback, but Mike Evans also produced, but before Brady got there, had some incredibly monster seasons when he got massive volume, huge yardage with some really not great quarterback play. So he's not someone I'm totally concerned with. I feel like he and Adams, I've kind of going back and forth on who I have higher. Right now, I've got them as wide receiver 11 and 12 in Dynasty, and kind of back to back there. Maybe I'm being real. Maybe I'm discounting Adams too much, having Lamb and Deebo ahead of him. I do feel pretty confident about Higgins as a top 8 guy, though. But yeah, so that's my tier 3. So Devin, you had larger tiers 1 and 2. So does tier 3 kind of shrink, or are you going deeper on your tier 3 than us?
It's slightly deeper, but it's about 7 players. So I have DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson, Chris Godwin, Terry McLaurin, Calvin Ridley, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, and Michael Pittman. So I kind of in the same boat with you. DJ Moore, talent-wise alone, should be in there, if not higher. Quarterback play has definitely held him back. I've actually owned him in a couple leagues, and I no longer own him because of that reason. But I mean, if you're looking at, dynasty-wise, having to pay for DJ Moore, having to pay for Devontae Adams. I know there's a lot of question marks around where, Devontae Adams is going to end up, anything like that. But personally, I think if I had Devontae Adams and someone gave me Evans plus something, then I would, make that trade. So that's why I kind of have Adams a little higher than Evans is actually in my next tier 4. But yeah, a lot of the guys in here, Chris Godwin would be much higher, but he's just coming off ACL. He's a free agent. You don't know what's going to happen with that. Deontay Johnson, we've already discussed. He's got a lot of question marks around him. Calvin Ridley's got a lot of question marks around him. He would be in another tier above probably if it wasn't for the situation last year. There's still a lot of question marks there. So I agree with you guys. I like T. Higgins quite a bit. I've been a big fan of his. Was really hoping he was going to take a bigger leap than they drafted Chase, and then we all know how that went. But he's still a solid wide receiver too, but I do think he's got a little bit of a ceiling that where, Chase is going to take over at a certain point to where he's not going to fully reach that.
To me, the most interesting question, and it was something I was going to bring up in the show for sure, is Calvin Ridley. What do we see for him?
I didn't know that it was going to be like, I knew it was like a mental health issue, and that's why he was sitting out. But then it leaked towards the end of the season that he was actually wanting to be traded. And then now Arthur Blank, the owner of the Falcons, is saying that he hopes to hold on to him. So it almost, it's taken a little bit of a turn for me. I didn't know there was actually more problems with the team that were adding to the situation. Regardless, he's still a little bit of an older. I know he's not been in the league that long, but he's 27. I think he'll be 28 soon. When he's in there, he's elite. But, it is bringing up questions of reliability. I know a lot of people had him, drafted him very high this year. He came off a monster year the previous year. Is he still going to be attached to Matt Ryan? Is he going to get a new QB? So that's why I struggle with him. I kind of think he's going to stay with the Falcons, but also now hearing this other layer of a possible trade is kind of throwing a wrench into what I thought was happening in that whole situation.
Yeah, same here. My gut says he gets traded, but I don't know. What do you think, Kyle?
It's tricky because this seems like this is I guess this is the final year of his rookie contract. So, or is this the 5th-year option year?
I think this is the 5th-year option year. I think he came out in 18. So maybe this is
he and DJ Moore the same year, right? And Moore's already seen a big extension, I believe.
Yeah.
So I think So 5th-year option, this is going to be like this is like a big jump in pay compared to previous seasons, right? So in a sense, maybe the Falcons are better off in their mind trading him away before they have to commit that money to him this year, right? Like maybe like they haven't financially invested that much into him. So maybe you trade him now and get a pick back before you make that financial investment and you still have the draft picks. Cause you could probably, even if you gets through the season and then you extend him, you can still probably trade him later for the draft picks, but you're committing that money to him, right? So maybe this is the way to kind of get out before you have to. So
this is the hard part with these 5th-year options now, is once you commit to it, it's fully guaranteed. There was still a kind of a back out point before the previous under the previous CBA. So now, you can't even back out. So when this pay raise comes in, doesn't matter if you cut him or not, he's gonna get paid that money. So, they got to make the decision too, which I feel like a lot of franchises are very hesitant to do. I'll say, for example, like my Chicago Bears. Last year we franchised Allen Robinson. We knew we weren't trying to extend him. Should have tagged him, traded him, got something for him. He's gonna leave this year for nothing now. And I don't understand why a lot of teams are hesitant to do that. So, I mean, if he's unhappy there and he doesn't want to be there, get something for him. You drafted him with a 1st-round pick. You could probably get a 2nd-round pick for him, depending on what the cap situation is. Get something back. I mean, I don't understand why these teams, like if he's unhappy and he's probably going to leave, just make the best of the situation and get something for him.
Yeah, they should be like one of these Devin teams we were talking about playing for the future, because if they're realistic, they're not going to the playoffs next year for sure. So.
I mean, they just because that division is so awful, they might they could be like Washington in 2020, right? They made it as a 7-9 team. Like they could be an 8-9 team winning that division, even a 7-10 team.
Division. I was just saying that division, it's wide open, man. It's
maybe do they see that as like, well, we need to strike now? We'll double down with Matt Ryan and really try to go for a final like hurrah win now phase over these next 2 years where they think they might be the best team in the division. So I could also see it. Maybe they don't want draft picks for Ridley. They want players, right? Like maybe there's something where they take on a certain salary and that's kind of what facilitates the trade as well. So is there a wide receiver swap to be made? I don't know. There's definitely
that's kind of the reason why they went the way they did last year with their draft. They were they thought they were in win now mode. So that's why they went Pitts over Fields and some of the other quarterbacks that were still available at that time. So I think it's hard for these owners to admit, just like it is in Dynasty, it's hard to admit when you're not a contender. When you have Matt Ryan, he can win you a Super Bowl. He can. It's possible, but there is a lot of holes on their defense. They need a lot of rebuilding to be done. But yeah, for me, he should be moved. But, back to kind of why I have him in this tier is, there's just all of these surrounding questions that makes him a really hard player to rank. Talent-wise, of course, he's going to be top 2 tiers, top 3 at worst. But yeah, that's why it's, pretty hard to rank the guy at the moment.
Yeah, so you said, it's hard to admit. Sometimes it's just simply hard to gauge if you're a contending team or not, because you've seen the 6 seeds get in the playoffs and win it, even though their team's not that great. So same scenario here.
You talking about the Packers? So they were the 6th seed and they won the Super Bowl?
No,
talking about the Falcons being unable to figure out whether they're successful or not. Yeah. Who knows?
Well, I'm thinking back.
49ers this year.
Well, I'm thinking back when the Falcons lost the Super Bowl. They beat the Packers the previous week, so I really can't say much to them.
Yeah, that's true. One question I did have with thinking back on the Evans, do you see the Bucs going to go out and get another quarterback, or are they going to go with Kyle Trask? What do you think is going on with that?
Personally, I think the quarterback situation is there's going to be a lot of moving chairs this year. I think there's quite a bit of people who could move, and I think they're going to go for someone. They're still built to contend right now. They're just a quarterback away. I'm not fully convinced that Brady isn't going to come back once it gets a little closer to the season. Like, I think he's going to get itchy, want to come back. I could see that going both ways. But even if the Brady doesn't come back, I saw today that they're actually being considered possibly stepping their toe into the Deshaun Watson waters. So, if something like that happens, I mean, they truly are a quarterback away. They're still a great team. So I don't think they're going to just roll with, Blaine Gabbert or Kyle Trask or anything like that. I just don't see that happening.
You've got Trask on the rookie deal, so it makes sense to kind of have him on the team, but maybe, he's your long-term backup for the next, at least these next 3 seasons. And I mean, maybe at some point, maybe by the end of his rookie contract, he shows enough that you make him the starter. But I kind of get the sense they're going to, maybe they have no choice and they have to go into the season with Kyle Trask, but I think their intention will be to not do that. They're gonna try and look. And like you said, Devin, there'll be a lot of quarterbacks shuffling around. My kind of chaos brain, do they just end up signing Winston after everything? Okay, Brady, the only reason you weren't on the team is because we could get Tom Brady, and no offense. I mean, I don't mind if I offend Jameis Winston as all, but he's the greatest quarterback ever. We're obviously, if we can have Tom Brady, we're definitely taking Tom Brady. But that aside, he's gone. Now we want you back. Are they maybe gonna? If they make the best offer, who's to say that maybe I don't know, because it seems like Winston also. There were some comments he made when it happened that seemed like he was almost blindsided by the fact that they were interested in Brady, and so maybe there's some. Maybe he's not interested in it at all, no matter what the price is, the Bucs. He feels like they wronged him, but I just think that'd be hilarious if they end up just going back to Winston.
Right.
Maybe he can cut his interceptions. It was either 33 or 30. I forget. He had 30 touchdowns, I think, and 33 interceptions or vice versa. Maybe better than that now.
And it seemed like he didn't throw that many with the Saints. So I don't know, 2 years under Sean Payton, it was that enough? But now wherever he goes, he's not going to have Sean Payton. But has he learned enough from that even though he's not going to have Sean Payton as coach, that he can take those good habits from that? So a lot of quarterback movement. I suppose that's the next episode we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
But just so Devin, we think about your tiers. We're talking. You're closing in on wide receiver 20 by the end of your third tier, right? If I was my math's correct, you're probably at 17, 18.
I believe so. Yeah.
So I was going to make a point on that. Now I totally forget, but
19.
So I guess for you, wide receiver is super deep. So I guess, did you guys want to keep going with the tiers? Talk about tier number 4. I
think this to me was just, this wide receivers in general for the last few years has been the deepest group of players that there is. So to me, the way I've ranked, I know I've mentioned it a lot of times, is, age based, but also just the price you're going to have to pay for some of these guys. And a lot of these guys are just so similar that you're going to pay the same exact price for them, whether you're talking about the top guy in tier 3 or the bottom guy in my tier 3. So, I rank that a lot to be the same way. Who I prefer, and then a lot of it is, okay, am I going to have to give up a first to this guy? Or can I give up a first and get this guy? So I kind of, weigh who I can do it that way as well.
So a bit of the, knowing that the trade value is there. I know for myself, it's all about, I do tiers. The startups are more there, which is why I won't even have Ridley or Godwin in my 4th or maybe even 5th tier of wide receiver, because from a startup perspective, I don't want to invest that much risk. But established dynasty teams, I'm more willing to trade for those guys, especially a guy like Godwin. If my team isn't so set on competing like it is more on towards the rebuild cycle, I don't mind trading for a guy like Godwin. And if he doesn't start the season playing and he's on the PUP list or even on the injured reserve, I'm not so concerned with those teams. So the heavy competitive teams, I kind of want to avoid those guys. Whereas the teams that are kind of more in rebuild, I don't mind a sort of a quote unquote lost season for Godwin and then come back stronger in 2023. So I guess it's all dependent. Probably so more likely to make trades for those guys than I am to draft them in startup, specifically Godwin and Ridley, just because they're in your tier. But I kind of feel like Michael Thomas probably enters a similar discussion. So I've kind of got all 3 of those guys ranked similarly for that reason. Just so much risk, and from a startup perspective, I don't want to invest in the risk. I'm more willing to trade for it when I know what teams can take the risk.
Yeah, especially in a startup. I mean, you can't be taking gamble picks early on where those guys are going to be required to take. You need to really hit home runs with those first ones and take your gambles later on. I actually did just trade for Godwin. Funny enough, in one of my leagues, one of the leagues I won. But I already had DK Metcalf, Justin Jefferson, Claypool, Galladay. So when you start 3 wide receivers in that league, and it's Little Harry starting Claypool, Galladay, they weren't very dependable this year, but I still like them into next year. But so I ended up trading a first for Godwin. So, I mean, it's a good time to strike on him coming off the ACL. I mean, I know there's a lot of questions. Like I said, he is a pending free agent. But he's still 25 years old. And when he is in there, he's one of the best in the league. So I wouldn't be too scared trying to get him. If you're rebuilding, I probably wouldn't take the risk. But if you're a contender and you don't really like a lot of the players in this draft class, that's definitely worth the risk, in my opinion.
I also think like the nature of the rebuild, right? Like, are you kind of still like in the rebuild process, but you're kind of closer to it? And really, like, I just recorded an episode today of the Reality Sports Online podcast. It's salary cap contract league, with auction drafts every year. So maybe it's a little easier to do that. But I took a team from worst to first, the 1 year rebuild is more possible to do in Dynasty than I guess maybe some people admit. Like, they hear rebuild, they think, okay, this is going to take 3-4 years. Like, you really can't turn it around in 1 year, right? So if this is just, okay, this is the year where I'm committing to kind of acquiring the future assets as much as possible, and to, eye on competing in 2023, that'd be the type of rebuild team where I'd want Godwin. But yeah, if you're okay, I've had like 3-4 years of heavy competitiveness. I've thrown away a lot of picks. Now it's kind of bottomed out. I really need 2 seasons to get back to that. That's maybe where I don't want Godwin. So I guess the nature of the rebuild too is different than that.
One name I'm seeing thrown out there a lot that I've got in tier 5, we haven't mentioned. A lot of the, like you said, a lot of the names are similar, but I've seen Elijah Moore being bandied around a lot. What do y'all think of him?
Yes, taking a look at my rankings, he would be in this tier 4 for me, which is another kind of bigger tier of kind of 7-8 guys. And I've got like him and Devontae Smith. I know, Terry McLaurin on the young. Well, I guess he's still on his rookie contract, but I guess an older prospect. But yeah, I guess that tier 4 for me is a lot of older guys: Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Tyler Lockett, DeAndre Hopkins. They're all 27 or older, but also some of the younger guys in this tier: Devontae Smith, Elijah Moore, and then I think that kind of basically puts me into the past the top 20. Now I'm kind of at wide receiver 22. I think that's kind of where the big tier break is for me. And my tier 5 is probably massive, like bigger than like the 10 guys I had in tier 3. And I think it's, again, a lot of the younger guys. That's where, like, I know one of you mentioned Pittman pretty high.
I did. Yeah, he was in my tier, but the last one in my tier 3.
And that's a guy more I see kind of in the tier 5, I guess, big question marks quarterback wise. And again, maybe
sure
you could say that with Elijah Moore too, right? Like, is Zach Wilson really the answer? He didn't really show much, but showed some improvement towards the end. But yeah, I guess Elijah Moore with him, I mean, he has a strong case to be like the real alpha on the Jets, and he could be the kind of guy that gets 140, 150 targets. It's just, what's the quality of those targets going to be?
He's another one of those guys that, if he is used almost like how we envision Waddle being used this year, I mean, could just absolutely skyrocket up some of these boards. But for me, he was also he was the first player in my tier 4. This tier for me is more the low cream of the crop for the young guys. So guys like him, Ayuk, so guys kind of that ilk. And then the older guys, like you said, I also have DeAndre Hopkins in here, Keenan Allen, Tyler Lockett, that are, still very productive wide receivers, but you're looking at the end of the line for their fantasy relevance.
And Devin, you're a Bears fan, right?
I am, unfortunately.
Name I think deserves to be thrown in there that I'm pretty high on is Darnell Mooney.
He's the first one in my tier 5, actually.
Same here.
I really do like Mooney. I think he's a very good route runner, which is, very good for the long term. That's not something that's going to hinder him at all. It's not something you really lose as you get older. We've kind of already discussed that here tonight, but I'm very interested in what the Bears are going to do. I'm not going to try to go on a huge Bear rant here, but they got a lot of holes at wide receiver. Right now, he's the wide receiver 1. He can have huge games. I don't think the Bears envision him as the true wide receiver 1 on the team. Wide receiver 2 all day long. But I think they're going to make a play for someone in free agency. I don't know if it's going to be very flashy. Maybe someone like a Chark, Kirk, someone like that. Maybe draft someone. But overall, he's still, I'm very high on the kid. He's very good. He gets open really well. And Justin Fields was a little bit held back. Not a little bit. He was very much held back by Nagy and the coaching staff that was let go. So I've seen a lot of good passes from him and that kid. They're gonna make some really good plays together.
I think one angle I really like is the lower, not lower tier, but like tier 4 and below. When it comes to younger receivers, I really like when they're matched with younger quarterbacks too. It gives them an opportunity to go together. Being the Bears, being the Eagles, there's so many similar. Being the 49ers, there's so many options like that. But I would much rather have a pairing with a younger quarterback than a more veteran quarterback when you're dealing with a young wide receiver that's just slightly below the top of the tier.
The length of the rookie contract they're going to build together, right? Like it's that there's not going to be like now, like Mooney, his next 2 years in Chicago, he's going to have Justin Fields as his quarterback, right? And then we'll see at the end of his rookie contract. But I do agree with you, Devin. Is I think the move of, and we talked about it earlier as well, like why did they bring in Allen Robinson? Right, he clearly wasn't happy, but because they clearly wanted a number one receiver, and they didn't view Mooney in that. Like if they viewed Mooney that way, they probably wouldn't have tagged Robinson. They would have been okay moving on from him. So the fact that they kind of, and maybe Mooney's surprised enough and impressed this year that it's changed their tune. So maybe just because they tried it last year, it obviously didn't work. So maybe they say, okay, let's try to build around Mooney as the number one, and let's get some. Because like you said, Christian Kirk, that doesn't strike me as someone that's going to come in and command targets away from Mooney.
Agreed.
Like if Kirk could, like either one could be the number one receiver, quote unquote, on any given week, but you got to feel like Mooney will have the inside track already having the one season with Fields. So, but if they go after, I don't know, maybe do they land Chris Godwin, who's a free agent? Like that would be a guy that they would. That signals, okay, once Godwin's back and healthy, he'll be the number one guy. If they go for a bigger name like that, that maybe says and I mean, we've seen it before, different fantasy teams. You could be like we talked about with T. Higgins, right? You could be the number 2 receiver on the team and still be a top 10 wide receiver. So Mooney not being the number 1 doesn't hurt him fantasy wise. So yeah, I've got him, I think wide receiver 23. Yeah, right after Devontae Smith, Elijah Moore. So it's that I still find that tier above Keenan Allen, Cooper, Lockett, McLaurin, Hopkins, like when they're healthy and producing, that's higher production. But I think those 3 below Smith, Moore, and Mooney, they do have room to kind of move up into the top 20, top 15, maybe if they have a really great season.
Yeah, and especially right now, Fields and Mooney, they've already been working together a lot this offseason. Literally the week after the season ended, they both flew to Florida and they were down there for 2 or 3 weeks together just practicing because, one of the big parts that really kind of hurt the Bears was they gave all the training camp reps and everything like that to Dalton and didn't give it to Fields. So he wasn't even practicing with Mooney. So it's not like they really had any kind of connection when Fields actually became the starter because Fields was thrown to the 3rd and 4th string guys the entire time in training camp. So there's a lot of room there to grow. So, I mean, he is a really good buy candidate, I think, even if they do bring in someone else, just because they've already been working together this offseason. There's a lot of room for that relationship to blossom. I mean, they already had a couple 100-yard games together and everything like that. So you've seen the potential, but I think he's a very good one as well. I'm just a little hesitant to say that he's going to be the number 1 on the team.
And you were mentioning those older guys out of Lockett, Hopkins, and Allen. And my preference personally is going to go with Keenan Allen.
Yeah, agreed.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of those guys that's really good. He's really good for you can buy pretty cheap, and he's going to give you elite numbers still. I mean, he's in no means washed. I think he came up with a top 5 wide receiver year this year, something like that, depending on which one it was. It was no worse, was like top 10. But he's a PPR machine, and he's one of those guys that, if you're a wide receiver away or if you need just a little bit better depth or whatever, I think he's very attainable, especially in this draft. I think you could get him for like the 110, 112 straight up, something like that.
And the jaw dropper for me is when Hopkins got hurt. He was not the leading receiver for the Cardinals. It was actually still Christian Kirk, which I don't know. That stunned me. I just assumed Hopkins would have been it, but he was not.
Also, Kirk Kirk's just one of those guys. He's never done anything. Like, I kind of thought when Kyler first came in, they had the college rapport chemistry together. Thought he was maybe going to take another step, and he never really did. And he seems more just kind of, the big play guy, anything like that. Maybe a wide receiver 3 on most teams. Like if, say, for example, the Bears, someone like that did sign him, that's what I would envision him as the third option. They would still be looking for a true number 1, like you said, Al. You don't envision him as a true difference maker that's going to take targets away from someone like that as well.
Yeah, that's more of a knock to me. Again, to me, not a positive thing for Kirk, but I was just kind of surprised Hopkins. He had slipped last year to partially due to injuries beforehand and whatnot, but he wasn't the elite receiver he had been in years past. So.
Yeah, I definitely think, Keenan Allen would be my preference. They're getting tied to Herbert. Seems like he's had some good touchdown years with Herbert as well. His big, even though the yardage hasn't been as massive. I think last year was a bit better for that. But yeah, I guess Brian, were there any tier 4 wide receivers for you that we didn't really talk about that you wanted to mention something about?
No, those are primarily the guys. The ones I mentioned. Mooney was more like a tier 5 kind of guy, but the guys that I threw out there, Mooney, Ayuk, and Elijah Moore were kind of my guys that we had not mentioned. The rest of my guys looked almost identical to yours. You're all so.
I am kind of glad that all of us didn't say Amon-Ra St. Brown, because I really thought someone was going to throw him up there higher, because I am not high on him, at least compared to what the vast majority of the Dynasty community is. I think he was afforded a lot of opportunity with Hawkinson and Swift, and even like Cephas taking a hit early in the year going down. I think he's a very good wide receiver. I think we've talked about him a little bit this offseason, but people are trading for him like he's the Dynasty wide receiver 6 or something like that, and so I think we're all kind of. Did you have him ranked in like tier 5 or a little lower, or where?
I've got him where he tier 5/tier 6. I envision him like a wide receiver, borderline wide receiver 2-3. And one thing everybody has to keep in mind, they've got a pretty decent offensive line. So unlike a lot of teams, they don't have to draft that. So you got to assume they're going to draft somebody with this pretty deep wide receiver class.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking right around wide receiver 30, like right around there.
That's pretty close to what I have too.
So I mentioned my tier 4 ends at Elijah Moore at 22, and tier 5 really starts with Darnell Mooney at 23. So like that tier 5 can stretch to about 10 players. So probably kind of lower end of the tier 5. I'm thinking guys like like Pittman. A guy I mentioned a bit earlier. I think I'd rather have Pittman than St. Brown. Probably Bateman as well, Claypool, Judy, Ayuk, even Gabe Davis. I think I'd probably rather have than Amon-Ra St. Brown. Maybe I'm a little higher on Gabe Davis as well. Just thinking that I do kind of envision him becoming that wide receiver 2 for the Bills. So not awful. I think I've got him like right ahead of Chris Godwin. So maybe that's just saying how low I am on Chris Godwin. But again, thinking that this is, and when I do rankings and tiers, I feel like people use them more when they're in draft. So I'm thinking more startup value for these. So but yeah,
I like Gabe Davis personally. Everybody remembers his playoff game, of course, but he'd actually had 3 or 4 good games towards the end of the season. If he gets that wide receiver 2 slot, he'll have a big year next year.
Even towards the end of 2020, he was good too,
exactly
right? So I think and then they brought in Sanders, and that kind of dampened.
That's exactly. I mean, I was like a truther back then as well. Like I liked a lot of his gameplay. I was like, okay, because. Who did they have on their team that was above him at that point? I can't remember.
John Brown.
So I was like, okay, John Brown's going to be out of the way. He's going to be able to step up. Then they bring in Sanders, like you said. And actually, it's very annoying because I've had Gabe Davis on my team for 2 years. And I had someone, I don't remember who it is, right before the playoffs come in back off IR. So I activated him, and I was looking through my roster, ended up dropping Gabe Davis. And then someone's already picked him back up. And now I'm like, I knew I shouldn't have did it in the moment, but it was just like, one of those things. Now I'm kicking myself that I've had him for 2 years, and now here I am.
The one thing we should all recommend, even though Gabe Davis has high upside, don't bother trying to trade for him right now.
It was fun in every one of my leagues. I'm in like 4 or 5, and I think in every single one after that playoff game, you got the sleeper notification. Gabe Davis is on the trade block. Everyone trying to capitalize on it, which is smart. But yeah, that was funny, man. It was just like one right after another, he was put on the trade block.
Yeah, definitely so. But please don't bother. Wait till week 1 or 2, and he might have at least one bad game out there, and then you can go trade for him then.
Well, even I even think maybe there's a bit of a dip in value if they sign a wide receiver in free agency, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe he could still overcome and become the wide receiver too, but it might not be as perceived as easily. So that might be something to look at. Heck, I mean, I think Beasley's still under contract, but they can get out of it if they choose not to cut Beasley and he's around. Maybe that alone just again dampen slightly the value. Everyone will still have that 4-touchdown game in their memory, Brian, like you're saying. But again, it's also maybe right now the assumption that guys like Sanders and Beasley are gone, and it's all Davis and Knox. It's going to be those two. But as soon as they bring in someone else that's maybe a bit younger than a Sanders or Beasley, maybe that gives enough of a bit of a dip to get that buy. Maybe not a buy low window, but not buying high window is you buy medium, we'll say on Davis. But yeah, I think the medium length episode, we got over an hour. So yeah, any final thoughts before we head out of here, guys?
No, like I said, if you have time to do your own projections, that's great. You're going to see a lot of the same names. All three of ours are very similar. So, like I said, kind of build your own consensus. That's always what I try to do.
Yeah, even if you look, I know we had different tier breaks. But pretty much we had a lot of the people in the same general positions. We might be 2 or 3 different spots compared to where we had them ranked. But overall, I think we had a pretty solid consensus on where they should be going and what their actual value is.
Yeah, I can think of maybe just like a 1 or 2 players where there was one person was kind of a bit of an outlier, like Devin had CD Lamb, for instance. But yeah, it seemed very rare, like more or less everything falling in line.
Yeah.
I know for myself, if it's a single quarterback startup, to me, it's probably the first rounds in my mind would be filled with just running backs and wide receivers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't know. I think the top 5-6 picks seem pretty obvious to me, whether it's Taylor, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. You're probably going to see a lot of those guys go 101 in startups. Maybe someone really likes Najee Harris, although I feel like those are probably like those 3, Taylor, Chase, Jefferson are probably the first 3 picks in most startups. I really like Harris and Swift, especially at O'Brien. You like Eckler and Mixon, so that's probably kind of your mid-first still.
Mixon's more like the back end of the first, but Eckler's top 6 to me.
No, and that's getting back to the value. Right? Like you like Mixon, but you're not going to draft him higher than where he needs to be drafted value-wise. You'd trade down to get him.
I won't reach him, no.
All right, that's fair, but yeah. So I'm kind of feeling like that top 5 probably pretty solid. Then from there, the back end 106 to maybe 204, pretty large group. Maybe tier breaks there as well. So maybe trade back from the mid first of a startup to the end of the first, or even trying to accumulate extra second round picks might be kind of the way to go.
I love trading back in dynasty startups. That's if you don't have one of the top tier picks, like top 5-ish, top 6, moving back, it does nothing but benefit you. You just stock up on the talent. Like I said, especially with how we have these tiers, you even saw it tonight that, might be 10 guys in one tier. If you move back, get an extra one of those guys, it does wonders for your team.
And then conversely, if you are going to trade up, make sure you're trading up into the top 3, top 4, right? Like you don't want to, go from 112 to 106, 107. There's probably not much point doing that jump.
Yeah, I agree. And you're going to get maybe Javonte Williams or someone like that maybe has question marks. It's just young, that has the upside, but you're not getting the solidified, bona fide wide receiver 1, 2 at worst.
Yeah. All right. So, I think this was a great episode on wide receiver discussions. I think on the next episode, 2 weeks from now, we'll do quarterbacks and tight ends, kind of combine that. I don't know that the tight end discussion, we want to spend too much time there. But yeah, and again, so these last episodes have really, again, recently at the very end of this episode, talk about the single quarterback, what a startup kind of looks like in the first round. Maybe we'll talk more super flex on the next episode when those quarterbacks, like how much How much does the first round change? How many quarterbacks go in the first round of a super flex? If we're saying, just quickly, like if it's a 1 quarterback league, your QB1's probably going in the 3rd round of a dynasty startup.
Yeah, at the earliest. Yeah, I'm kind of one. If I'm in a single quarterback league, I'll just wait. If it's single quarterback and it's 12, there's at least probably 10 quarterbacks that I'm fine rocking with a 1 quarterback format. Super flex, then possibly 101 is probably a quarterback. Not even possibly, it probably is.
Yeah,
so
typically the top 2 picks are going to be Mahomes and Allen, probably in super flex. So
yeah, whatever mix, we'll probably see a lot of that. Yeah, I know last year was seeing a lot of a Kyler Murray before we saw, Taylor or McCaffrey or Hill or whoever would have been the first non-quarterback to go. But yeah, well, I guess again that's discussion for next week's or 2 weeks from now. So again, appreciate everyone for listening. As always on the Going for Two Live network. So we'll go around the room and just share Twitter handles, let people know where they can find and follow you. So Devin, start with you again.
Twitter handle is @Devin Deal, and don't forget about the 22222 deal going on right now.
Yeah, get those 22% off on the PLPs. You got 5 more days, folks.
I'll repeat. I won't try to repeat all the numbers, but definitely check out that special for sure. You can reach me at Vandegrad92. I've got lots of different content, and if we actually have a baseball season, I might delve into that too, but we'll see how that goes. But thanks again for joining us. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. And again, I'm at Senator Says. Hopefully, listeners, viewers, you enjoyed it as well. You can always reach out to us on Twitter with the Going for Two Live network, at Going for Two Live. At Going4_2, it gives you access to everything from the live shows, but also all the great articles that are being written on goingfor2.com. So again, check all that out. Again, really appreciate the support. Brian, Devin, always great talking with you. And yeah, the 3 episodes in, I feel like we're really got our groove and a lot of great conversations happened today.
Definitely getting easier and it's enjoyable for sure.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
Well, on behalf of my 2 co-hosts, Brian and Devin, I'm Kyle Senra, and this was the Dynasty Gambit.